The air beneath the old pine sits cold and unmoving. Dozens of men crouch in the dark, their swords wrapped in cloth so the steel will not whisper against the scabbards. A small army, hidden past the temple lights. They came to kill one man. To dress the ambush in something close to honor, they placed a child at the center of it. A 10-year-old boy. The last heir of a broken house, dressed for a formal duel no one expects him to walk away from. This is not a challenge. It is an extinction, a final attempt to scrub one name off the surface of the world. But the men in the shadows have miscalculated. They believe the man walking toward them is the prey. History remembers him as Kensei, Sword Saint. The title is a lie. The man stepping into the clearing is no saint. He is a hunter who learned to kill before his voice had broken. A child who took his own damage and sharpened it into a blade. He moved through Sengoku Japan not as a seeker of enlightenment, but as a predator looking for worthy prey, treating a century of civil war as his private hunting ground. This is not a hero's journey. This is the autopsy of a perfect monster. A man who refined murder into a craft, then had the nerve to call it philosophy. He was made by violence. Violence was the only tongue he ever spoke fluently. We are going to strip the myth off Miyamoto Musashi and look at the machine underneath. 3 masterpieces of killing. First, the public dismantling of the most respected sword school in the capital. An erasure so complete, their name vanished from the records. Second, the slow psychological unmaking and execution of the most celebrated duelist Japan had ever produced. And last, his final creation, a book that is not wisdom, but a manual. A cold, step-by-step instruction set on how to break and end another human being. Before we go down into that dark, tell us in the comments which city and country you are watching from. Take a second to subscribe and join the family. You are watching Ancestral, the best dark history channel in the world. A boy stands in a dirt field with a 6-foot wooden staff in his hands. He is 13 years old. In front of him, a grown swordsman is still adjusting the cords of his armor. The grown swordsman has perhaps 10 seconds left to live. This is the first time history sees Shinmen Benosuke. The world will later call him Miyamoto Musashi. To understand how a child becomes that, look at the country he was born into. Japan in the late 16th century was not a nation. It was an open wound that refused to close. For more than 100 years, the islands had been eating themselves alive in civil war. The emperor in Kyoto still sat on his throne behind the lacquered walls of the Gosho, but his power was a polite story whispered inside silent temples. The actual decisions were made in mud and in smoke, by men with steel. The daimyo, the great lords, had carved the country into private kingdoms. Each kingdom rested on a foundation of broken oaths and unburied dead. A lord could wake up in a fortress at dawn. By midday, his head could be sitting on a pike outside his own gate, lacquered black, the name tag tied to the top knot. Historians call this period the Sengoku Jidai, the age of the country at war. A more accurate name would be the age of the meat grinder. It had been grinding since the Onin War cracked Kyoto in AD 1467. The capital had burned for 10 years. Whole districts north of the imperial palace had been reduced to ash and weeds. By the time Benosuke was born, Oda Nobunaga had been dead 2 years, killed in flames at Honnoji Temple by his own general Akechi Mitsuhide. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the peasant-turned-warlord, was already nailing the country back together with executions and tax registers. The unifications were happening above the boy's head. The bodies were happening at his feet. Around AD 1584, in the small village of Miyamoto in Harima Province, A boy was born to a man named Shinmen Munisai. Munisai was a local sword instructor of the Tori-ryu school. He was hired muscle for the Shinmen clan, a minor house clinging to a minor castle. There is a story preserved in later writings that Munisai once trained the boy with such cold violence that the child considered killing him in his sleep. Whether the story is true does not matter. The detail it preserves does. There was no warmth in that house. There was no safety in the world outside it either. No fixed code. No reliable adult. The only curriculum the era offered was a slow, daily lesson in how little a human life was worth. A samurai's honor could be spent in a single breath. A farmer's life was valued below the rice he raised. Villages were not burned for strategy. They were burned so an enemy would have nowhere to sleep, nowhere to eat, no well to drink from. Hideyoshi's sword hunts, the Katanagari edicts of 1588, had already started stripping weapons from the peasantry. The new order being built was simple. Steel belonged to the few. The rest were meat. This was the air the boy breathed. Strength was the only virtue. Survival was the only law. His first lesson came in his 13th year. It did not come in a training hall. A wandering swordsman named Arima Kihei walked into the village. Kihei carried the credentials of the Kashima Shinto-ryu school, founded a generation earlier by Tsukahara Bokuden, one of the most respected names in the eastern provinces. He carried his arrogance like a second sword. He drove a wooden notice board into the ground and posted a public challenge. Anyone who wished to test themselves was welcome. It was routine road theater, a way to collect another easy win and add another line to a reputation that would feed him in the next town. The boy walked up to the notice and wrote his own name under Kihei's. 13 years old. No master. No school affiliation. A child. When Kihei saw the name, he laughed. Then he accepted. It was the last decision he ever made. The day of the duel arrived. Kihei came dressed correctly. Lacquered chest armor. Both swords at his hip. The long katana and the short wakizashi. He was expecting the ritual, the bow, the pause, the measured first strike, the clean exchange of skill that ended with a small cut and a public apology. What walked toward him through the dirt was a feral boy carrying a 6-foot wooden bow. The boy did not bow. He did not wait. He did not listen for any signal. While Kihei was still settling his stance, the boy started running. There was no technique in it, just sound and forward motion. He screamed as he closed the distance. The crowd along the edge of the field heard the breath leave Kihei's chest before the staff even touched him. The boy did not try to strike with the staff. He used it as a lever. He drove the swordsman backward, knocked the balance out of him, and dropped him into the dirt. Kihei, a trained killer, found himself on his back, staring up at the snarling face of a child. The protocol had been broken so completely that his brain could not catch up. This was not a duel. It was an assault. The boy did not draw a blade. He did not look for a clean finishing cut. He took the wooden staff and beat Kihei between the legs, over and over. The sound of the wood against bone carried to the edge of the field. The crowd went silent. While the man convulsed in the mud, the boy lifted the staff above his head and brought it down on his skull. The bone gave way. Kihei died in the dirt of a village he had walked into the day before, looking for an easy story. The crowd had come to watch swordsmanship. They watched a butchering instead. Musashi himself recorded this fight, decades later, in the opening lines of the Book of Five Rings. He wrote it as a single sentence: cold, clinical. No emotion attached. The man who would later be called a saint of the sword introduced himself to history by killing an adult swordsman with a stick at the age of 13, and he saw nothing in that act worth more than one line. There was nothing heroic in it. It was the cold work of a child who had already understood something most warriors die without learning. Honor is a cage. The man who refuses to step into the cage wins every time. There is no such thing as an unfair fight. There is only the one who walks away and the one who does not. 4 years later, he earned the rest of his education in a single day. It was the autumn of AD 1600. The country was about to be decided on a field in Mino province called Sekigahara. Toyotomi Hideyoshi had died 2 years earlier, in September of 1598, leaving behind a 5-year-old heir named Hideyori and a council of 5 regents who hated each other. The cracks opened fast. 2 camps formed. The Western Army stood behind Ishida Mitsunari, the bureaucrat loyal to the Toyotomi child. The Eastern Army stood behind Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man whose patience had teeth and whose memory ran 60 years deep. Musashi, 17 years old, joined the Western side. His father had served the Shinmen, and the Shinmen had sworn to Mitsunari. He was not a commander. He was not even a real samurai. He was an ashigaru, a foot soldier, a number in a column. He marched with the Ukita clan under the banner of Ukita Hidei, swallowed inside a force of more than 80,000 men. Across the valley waited Ieyasu's 75,000. The valley itself sat at a crossroads. The Nakasendo Road from the east, the Hokokukaido Road from the north. Whoever held Sekigahara held the road to Kyoto. On the morning of October 21st, a heavy fog sat low over the ground. It had been raining for 2 days. The earth had turned into a cold paste that pulled at the ankles and pulled the straw sandals off the feet of marching men. The temperature was near freezing. Mitsunari had ordered his lines into position before dawn. The men had stood in the dark, in the wet, for hours, waiting for an enemy they could not see. When the fog finally thinned, around 8 in the morning, the 2 largest armies the islands had ever assembled were staring at each other across a few hundred yards of open field. The first shots came from a unit of Naomasa's red-armored cavalry, the Red Devils, who broke formation to fire matchlock volleys into the Ukita lines. Naomasa had taken the opening shot on purpose. He wanted his clan's name written first into the day's record. What followed was not the swordplay of the scrolls. It was an industrial process. For 6 hours, the 2 armies fed each other into the meat. Matchlock muskets cracked in long, ragged waves, a sound like canvas being torn over and over without rest. The Portuguese and Dutch had been selling firearms into Japan for 50 years. By Sekigahara, both armies carried tens of thousands of them. Spear formations crashed together and became a single forest of shafts and screaming. Mounted samurai vanished into the smoke, their banners swallowed in seconds, the colors swallowed inside the gunpowder haze that hung over the valley like a second fog. Musashi was inside that, a teenager with cheap gear and a borrowed weapon. He saw men opened from shoulder to hip by single cuts. He saw horses stumble on the dead and crush the men who had been riding them moments before. He smelled gunpowder and old sweat, and the iron of fresh blood, and the bodily mess of men dying without dignity. Then he learned the lesson of the day. It was not about courage, it was about betrayal. On a hill called Matsuoyama sat a young lord named Kobayakawa Hideaki. He commanded 15,000 men. He had sworn his loyalty to the Western cause. He had also, weeks earlier, taken a secret promise from Ieyasu. He sat on his hill and did nothing while the battle below him bled. Ieyasu, losing patience, ordered his arquebusiers to fire a volley up at Kobayakawa's position. A message. Choose, Kobayakawa chose. At noon, his 15,000 men poured down the slope and slammed into the western flank from behind. The clans of Wakisaka, Ogawa, Kuchiki, and Akaza switched sides in the same hour. The western line broke. Otani Yoshitsugu, a commander so ill with leprosy that he had to be carried into battle in a covered palanquin, saw the betrayal coming and held his position long enough to draw his own short sword and take his own life rather than be captured. Konishi Yukinaga, a Christian convert, was hunted down days later and beheaded in Kyoto. Ishida Mitsunari himself was caught hiding in a cave, dragged to the capital, paraded through the streets, and executed at the Rokujo riverbed. What had been an army became a panicked herd. The Eastern soldiers spent the rest of the daylight hunting the survivors through the fields. By dusk, over 30,000 men lay in the mud, some still moving, most not. The heads collected that day filled 3 separate inspection mounds. Ieyasu personally inspected them by lamplight. Musashi was not among the dead. He crawled out of the wreckage of a defeated army. He was now on the losing side of a war that had just decided the next 260 years of Japanese history. He was a wanted name, a masterless samurai, a ronin, a ghost with a sword. Whatever was left of his boyhood had burned off on that field. He had learned in a single afternoon that armies fail, that lords sell each other for one good offer, that loyalty leads honest men into shallow graves. The only thing a man could count on was the arm at his side and the steel in his hand. He disappeared into the back country. What followed was his Musha Shugyo, the warrior pilgrimage. The phrase sounds spiritual. It was not. It was a long, deliberate hardening. He walked the roads of Japan like a rumor, the Tokaido running along the Pacific coast, the Nakasendo threading through the mountains, the small mountain passes nobody mapped. He hunted duels, sought out the famous schools, the celebrated names, anyone who might test him. His body became part of the weapon. He stopped bathing. He stopped combing his hair. Later writers, including the Edo period chronicler who compiled the Nitenki, claimed he refused the bath because a man could be ambushed while naked in the water. He wore the same clothes for months, packed with road dust and campfire grease and the dried brown of old fights. He was tall for the era, well over 6 feet, with a stripped, ropey strength. His skin cracked from sun and wind. His hair grew into a long, dark tangle. He looked less like a samurai and more like an oni walking out of a black forest. This was not neglect. It was design. The appearance was a piece of psychological armor that did half the work before he ever drew a blade. It told every potential opponent the same thing. I am not one of you. I do not bow to your rules. I might be insane. I might be diseased. I might be something worse. Are you sure you want to test it? In that pause, in that half-second of hesitation, Musashi would already be moving. The change went deeper than the body. On those roads, he built the actual engine of his genius. He came to a conclusion that most swordsmen of his time would have called blasphemy. Swordsmanship, as it was taught, was a lie. The endless polishing of forms, the reverence for the kata, the arguments over the exact angle of a cut, all of it was scenery. A duel, Musashi decided, was a fight between two minds. The blades only signed the contract that the minds had already written. So he stopped studying swords. He started studying people. Before he ever named a challenger, he watched him. He learned the man's habits. When he ate, when he drank, who he listened to, what insulted him, what made him proud. He watched the way the man placed his feet on the ground when he thought no one was looking. He was running surveillance on a target. Every man, he realized, has a rhythm. Break the rhythm, you break the man. He turned every duel into stagecraft. He arrived hours late, sometimes most of a day late, letting his opponent's nerves chew through themselves while the sun climbed and dropped and the gathered witnesses began to mutter. He used taunts and insults to crack the calm a trained swordsman relied on. He showed up with the wrong weapon on purpose, a short blade, when the other man expected a long one. Two swords when tradition said a man fought with one, a wooden oar carved into a club. Every choice was made to put the other man inside a story he did not understand. He was not training to cut men in half. Other men could already do that. He was training to take their composure apart before the first blow. He was building something new, a clean, godless science of victory, with all the polite illusions stripped out. The killer was becoming an artist. If you are still with me, you are one of us. This channel exists to dig up the bones that polite history would rather keep buried. If you want to go deeper, join the lineage. It is our inner circle, our membership. By joining, you keep these investigations alive, you fund the next dig, and you see our work before anyone else does. The link is waiting in the description. Now follow the monster out of the wilderness. He is walking toward Kyoto, the old capital. The city still bears the burn scars of the Onin War in its outer wards. The smoke from 10,000 cooking fires sits over the rooftops at dusk. The bells of the temples mark the hours. And somewhere inside those streets stands a compound whose name has been spoken with respect for 4 generations. The Yoshioka, sword instructors to the shogun himself, back when there was still a shogun in this city to instruct. He is not arriving to challenge them. He is arriving to remove their name from history. AD 1604. Musashi walks into Kyoto. He does not arrive as a student looking for a master. He does not arrive as a ronin looking for a patron. He arrives the way a fever arrives in a body. The city he steps into is the cultural heart of the new Japan. 4 years after Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu has taken the title of shogun and moved the country's center of power east to a fishing town called Edo. But Kyoto is still the old soul. The Emperor Go-Yozei still lives behind the cypress walls of the Gosho. The court still composes poetry. The merchants of Nishijin still weave silk for ceremonies nobody has performed in 50 years. The bells of Kiyomizudera and Tofukuji and Honnoji ring across the rooftops every hour. Honnoji is still being rebuilt. The original temple, where Oda Nobunaga had burned alive in 1582, had been pulled down and moved by Hideyoshi. The new compound sits a few streets south of the old footprint. Locals still pass it and quietly say the word fire under their breath. This is the kind of city Musashi walks into, a city with scars under the lacquer. And in this city, one family owns the name of the sword, the Yoshioka. For 4 generations, they had served as the official sword instructors to the Ashikaga shogun. The first master, Yoshioka Kenpo, had taught swordsmanship and dyed indigo fabric in a workshop in the eastern wards. His students became the dueling backbone of the capital. Kenpo had reportedly fought a duel with Tsukahara Bokuden himself, the founder of the school that produced Arima Kihei. The threads connect. The world of swordsmen in this country is small, and Musashi has already cut one of those threads in a village field at the age of 13. By 1604, the Yoshioka school is run by his descendant, Yoshioka Seijuro. Seijuro inherited the dye business, the school, and a reputation that reached into the imperial palace. The famous Yoshioka cha, the dark brown dye that bears the family name, is still being sold in Kyoto. The income from the cloth pays for the dojo. Musashi, the unwashed survivor of a losing army, decided that this was the name he was going to break. He sent a formal written challenge directly to Seijuro. It was an act of breathtaking arrogance. A stray dog had walked into the courtyard of the household and growled. Refusing was not possible. To refuse was to admit fear, and admission of fear from the Yoshioka would close the dojo. The challenge was accepted. The location was set. A field outside the city, near the Rendaiji Temple, north of Kyoto, where execution grounds had once been used for criminals the city did not want buried inside the walls. The morning of the duel arrived in early spring. A thin frost on the dead grass. The hills to the north still wore snow on their upper ridges. Seijuro came in formal hakama, and a haori marked with the Yoshioka crest, the 8-petal flower. His senior students stood in a half-circle behind him. The witnesses, several minor nobles and city officials, arranged themselves at a safe distance. A clerk from the city office stood ready with paper and ink to record the result. Everyone was in place. Musashi was not. The sun climbed. An hour. 2 hours. The frost burned off the grass, and the ground began to soften under the witnesses' sandals. A senior student named Mibu was sent to scout the road. He came back with nothing. Seijuro's face stayed composed, but the small muscles at the corners of his jaw began to lock. The cords of his hori cut a deeper line into his shoulders each time he adjusted his weight. The delay was the first cut. To make a man of Seijuro's rank wait was a public statement that his time was worth less than the whim of a vagrant. The longer it ran, the deeper the stain. 3 hours. 4. Some of the witnesses had begun, quietly, to leave. The clerk closed his inkstone to keep it from drying. When Musashi finally appeared, the sun was past its peak. He walked in slowly, taking the long path around the field instead of the direct one. His hair was uncombed, his clothes were creased. He looked like a man who had spent the morning sleeping in a ditch and saw no reason to apologize for it. He looked at Seijuro the way a butcher looks at a hanging carcass. Bored. Assessing. He did not greet the witnesses. He did not bow to the clerk. Seijuro stepped forward and drew his katana. The blade was a bison work, polished to a near-white sheen. The maker's signature was etched into the tang under the hilt. Musashi reached down and pulled out a piece of wood. A bokken. A wooden training sword, probably carved by his own hands on the road, from a length of red oak. Plain. Heavy. Not lacquered. Not decorated. One end still carried the rough cut of the blade that had shaped it. The insult landed inside the chests of every witness in the field. In a duel with live steel, to bring a wooden stick was a written statement. You are so far beneath my skill that I do not require a real weapon to put you in the dirt. Seijuro charged. His form was correct. His footwork was schoolbook. The cut came down in the line he had taught hundreds of students, the kesagiri, from the left shoulder down across the body. It was the cut of a master. The problem was that he was no longer fighting as a master. He was fighting as a humiliated man, and the humiliation had been growing inside him for the 4 hours he had stood in the cold. Musashi did not parry. He stepped inside the arc of the descending blade and brought the bokken down with both hands on Seijuro's left shoulder. The sound was not the ring of steel. It was the dull, wet snap of a green branch breaking in the rain. Seijuro's shoulder collapsed. The katana fell from his right hand into the grass. He went down to his knees, then to his side, holding the arm that no longer belonged to him. A small, dark patch began to spread across the silk of his haori, where the bone had pushed up through the skin from underneath. The senior students did not move. They could not move. The protocols of the duel did not include any instruction for what they had just witnessed. Musashi stood over him for a count of 3. He did not finish the cut. He did not behead him. Killing Seijuro would have made him a martyr. A clan can rebuild around a dead hero. A clan cannot rebuild around a cripple sitting in a back room of the family compound. He turned and walked off the field without a word. He did not even take the dropped katana as a trophy. Seijuro never fought again. He shaved his head, took monastic vows, and disappeared into a temple to live out the rest of his life as a maimed man whose name was attached to a single story he could not stop people from telling. The Yoshioka were bleeding from the inside. The clan's honor now passed to the younger brother, Yoshioka Denshichiro. The records suggest he may have been the more talented swordsman of the two. He was certainly the angrier one. According to the Yoshioka Den, an account compiled by descendants of the school, Denshichiro stopped speaking to his older brother after the duel. He sent the challenge to Musashi within weeks of Seijuro's withdrawal into the temple. This was not a duel for an audience. This was a blood debt. The location was set at the Sanjusangen-do, the long temple of the 1,000-armed cannon, on the eastern side of the city. The hall itself was already nearly 400 years old, a wooden gallery 120 meters long, with 1,001 gilded statues of the Bodhisattva standing inside in ranks. Archery contests called tosha were held along the western veranda, where archers fired arrows down the full length of the building. The duel would happen in the open ground outside that veranda, in sight of the red beams and the lines of statues inside. Denshichiro had studied his brother's defeat. He knew the trap. He would arrive on time. He would stay calm. He would not be provoked by waiting. Musashi simply changed the script. This time, he arrived early. Hours early. He was already there when Denshichiro walked up the path past the south gate, sitting on a stone with his back to the wall of the hall. Watching. The same psychological weapon turned upside down. Now, Denshichiro was the one walking onto a stage that already belonged to his opponent. The senior students who had come to witness saw their new master's pace falter for a single step before he recovered. And in Musashi's sash, this time, was a live blade. The wooden sword was gone. The mercy was gone. The lesson stage was over. Denshichiro carried a polearm called a kusarigama, a sickle with a long chain weighted at the end. Other accounts say he carried a bakken of his own, heavier than Musashi's. The sources do not agree. What they agree on is the duration of the fight. It lasted one cut. Denshichiro attacked with full commitment. Musashi stepped forward and brought his blade down across the front of the skull. One of the surviving accounts says the blow split the head from the crown down to the bridge of the nose. Another says it cleaved the collarbone and opened the chest. The details do not survive cleanly. The result does. The second master of the Yoshioka school lay dead on the stones outside Sanjusangen-do. Blood ran into the gravel between the foundation pillars of the hall, where Cannon's 1,000 wooden faces watched without expression. 2 masters in 2 duels. One crippled. One in the ground. Inside a single season. For any other family, that would have been the end of the story. The Yoshioka had a different idea. They were not finished. They had wealth. They had retainers. They had buildings. They had decades of accumulated rage. and they no longer believed in the rules. They convened in the family compound in the Eastern Ward and made a decision that erased 4 generations of accumulated honor in a single conversation. They were not going to challenge Musashi again. They were going to murder him. They called in every student, every retainer, every loyal blade still tied to the family. Some accounts put the number near 70. The Hyoho Senshi Denki, a 17th-century chronicle of Musashi's life, written by his adopted descendants, puts the number higher than that. The crucial detail is the weapons. They brought bows. They brought matchlock muskets. Firearms had been pouring into Japan since the Portuguese landed on Tanegashima in AD 1543, and after Sekigahara, there were enough of them in private hands to outfit a small private army. The Yoshioka had access to enough to turn a hillside into a kill zone. To paint a thin coat of legitimacy over the ambush, they named a new official head of the school, Yoshioka Matashishiro. He was the son of Seijuro. He was, by the surviving accounts, around 12 years old. He would be the named challenger. He would stand in the open as the formal duelist. The bowmen and gunmen and swordsmen would hide in the dark around him, waiting for Musashi to approach. The location they chose was a road outside Kyoto, beneath a famous old pine called the Sagari Matsu, near the Ichijoji Temple, on the lower slope of Mount Hiei. Mount Hiei itself carried its own weight in the Japanese imagination. 3 decades earlier, in 1571, Oda Nobunaga had marched up that mountain with 30,000 men and burned the Enryakuji monastery to the foundations, killing every monk, woman, and child he found. The smoke had been visible from Kyoto for days. The slopes still held that memory. The duel was set for dawn. The ambush would be set in the dark before it. The men of the Yoshioka were so consumed by what had been done to them that they were willing to set their own 12-year-old heir in a clearing as bait. The boy was the last male of the senior line. If he died, the family name died with him. They sent him anyway. They believed Musashi would arrive on the path at the appointed hour, walk into the clearing, see the boy, hesitate, and die under a wall of arrows and lid. They had still not understood what they were dealing with. Musashi had expected exactly this. He had read the clan from the start. He knew that public humiliation of that depth always ends in ambush. He had been waiting for it. On the night of the meeting, he did not walk up the main road at the agreed hour. According to the Hyoho Senshi Denki, he arrived the previous evening, climbing the slope from the south, by an old hunter's trail that the Yoshioka had not thought to watch. He found a hidden position above the pine and lay down in the cold ground to wait. From there, he watched the trap take shape. He counted the archers settling into their positions among the cedars. He saw their bowstrings being waxed against the night damp. He counted the gunmen crouching behind a low stone wall, their match cords already lit, the slow orange points of the cords floating in the dark like a row of low stars. The smell of burning rope drifted up the slope, mixed with the resin of the pines. He saw the swordsmen arranging themselves in a horseshoe around the clearing. He counted them twice. He saw the boy, Matashishiro, brought forward in a formal hakama, placed under the pine, told to stand still. The boy was holding a sword that was nearly his own height. One of the retainers adjusted his grip on the hilt. He let them finish. He let them settle into the comfortable confidence of a plan that was working. He waited until the first gray of the sky began to lift behind Mount Hiei, when the men in the ambush would be at the lowest point of their concentration. Then he moved. He did not attack the perimeter. He did not engage the outer ring. He came down the slope from above them, from the angle they had not watched, fast and low and silent on the bed of pine needles, and he went straight for the center of the formation. he went for the boy. The retainers heard him before they saw him. A branch broke. A sandal hit a root. By the time the first archer pulled, Musashi was already inside the kill range, where bows cannot turn fast enough and muskets cannot be aimed without hitting your own men. This was the night the two-sword style appeared in real combat. He drew the long katana with his right hand and the short wakizashi with his left. The school had a name later. Niten Ichi Ryu. Two heavens. One school. On this night, it had no name. It was a man with a blade in each hand, moving through an ambush designed for a man with one. To the Yoshioka retainers, it was wrong. It violated every form they had been taught. Every kata they had drilled assumed an opponent fighting with both hands on a single grip. This was not that. One blade parried while the other cut. One blade threatened while the other killed. There was no still moment in which to land a clean attack. He reached the boy under the pine. He killed him with one stroke. The accounts differ on whether the blow took the head or the trunk. The accounts agree on the silence that followed it. The senior retainer standing closest to the boy is recorded by the Hyoho Senshi Denki as dropping to his knees and not rising again. The center of the formation fell out. The named challenger was dead. The legal fiction that gave the ambush its shape had ended. The retainers around the clearing were no longer executing a plan. They were a panicked crowd in the dark with edged weapons. Musashi cut his way out through the trees. The gunmen could not fire without hitting their own. One of the matchlocks went off anyway and dropped one of the swordsmen in the outer ring. The archers fired blind and hit their own. Arrows hissed past Musashi's head and lodged in the trunks of the cedars. The swordsmen came at him one and two at a time and went down one and two at a time. He worked through the perimeter on the downhill side and disappeared into the slope before the sun was high enough to clear the ridge. When the full light came up over Mount Hiei, the road under the old pine was wet. Men were lying in positions that did not match any battle plan. The boy's body lay under the tree. The lit match cords on the dropped muskets were still burning, small orange points among the leaves. Musashi was already walking north, on the road that ran behind the mountain, toward the lake at Omi. The Yoshioka School of Swordsmanship, official instructors to the Ashikaga shoguns, 4 generations old, was finished. Not defeated. Erased. The dye business limped on under cousins for a generation. The Yoshioka Cha Brown is still made today, but the name as a school of the sword ended at Ichijoji. Later, writers had to dig through scattered family records to even reconstruct the names of the 3 brothers. One man, one night, ended a dynasty. The cold engineering behind that night is laid out decades later by Musashi himself in his own handwriting. The book he wrote in a cave called Reigando on the slopes of Mount Iwato in Higo Province at the end of his life, the Goren no Sho, is treated today as a national treasure in Japan. The original manuscript was lost to fire in the 17th century. Copies survived. The text survived. The mind of the man survived. That book, The Book of 5 Rings, the primary source for this entire investigation, is available right now on this channel. Tap the View Products button on your screen. It is not a polite history book. It is the field manual of an undefeated killer, written by the killer, explaining how to dismantle another human being before the blades meet. While you are in the shop shelf, look at the other relics our curators have pulled together to sit beside it. Dark objects, pieces of the world this story comes from. Take a moment to browse. Because after Ichijoji, Musashi had erased the most powerful school in Japan. There was only one name left in the country that could be placed against him. A swordsman trained from childhood in a different tradition, who who carried a blade so long it had its own nickname. A man considered, by everyone who had ever seen him fight, the perfect mirror image of Musashi himself. His name was Sasaki Kojiro. He was waiting on an island in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu. The island had no permanent inhabitants. The tide came in fast around it. There was one beach. It was already chosen. AD 1612. April. Musashi is 29 years old. He has spent 12 years on the road since Sekigahara. He has fought over 60 recorded duels and lost none of them. He has erased the Yoshioka. He has cut down spear masters in the courtyards of the Hozoin Temple in Nara, where the monks of the Kofukuji complex had developed a cross-bladed spear called the kamayari, and trained warriors in its use for 2 centuries. He has killed chain and sickle specialists in open fields, including a Shishido of the Kusarigama school, whose chain Musashi cut through with a short blade thrown underhand at the wrist. He has put a generation of named swordsmen into the ground. He is undefeated. He is also still a wanted ghost, a ronin without a lord, a name spoken in alleys instead of audience chambers. The country he walks through has changed. Tokugawa Ieyasu has handed the title of shogun to his son Hidetada in 1605, and now governs from semi-retirement at Sunpu Castle, on the coast at the foot of Mount Kuno. He calls himself Ogosho, the retired shogun. He still controls every important decision. The Toyotomi heir Hideyori, now 19 years old, still sits inside the walls of Osaka Castle, a slow problem the new regime is waiting to solve. The mother of Hideyori, Yodo Dono, sits with him, the last surviving piece of the Toyotomi line that once owned Japan. Christianity has been banned in stages. In 1597, Hideyoshi had crucified 26 Christians on a hill at Nagasaki. The new shogunate has begun adding to that work. The Hosokawa clan, who will host the duel about to happen, lost the household's most famous woman to that pressure 12 years earlier. Her name was Tama, baptized Gracia. She refused to be taken hostage during the Sekigahara campaign and ordered a retainer to kill her inside her own residence in Osaka in August 1600. The new order is building itself a permanent skeleton of edicts and registers. Swordsmen who once sold their services to whoever was paying are being slotted into household roles. Instructors with a stipend and a fixed address. The establishment has its own swordsman now, a man who is everything Musashi is not. His name is Sasaki Kojiro. The records on Kojiro are thinner than legend suggests. He appears in the chronicles fully formed, a swordsman of the Chujo-ryu line, with training said to have come from Toda Seigen or one of Seigen's senior students. Other accounts place him under a master named Kanamaki Jidai, who taught a related school in Echizen province on the Japan seacoast. He is younger than the legend usually shows. Some accounts put him close to Musashi's age. Others put him younger still. What the sources agree on is the style. He fought with a nodachi, a field sword, a blade nearly a meter long in the cutting edge alone, requiring both hands and the full reach of the shoulders to wield. He had given the weapon a name, Monohoshi Zao, the drying pole, the name a woman might give to the bamboo rod she hangs laundry from. It was a joke about its length. The joke was meant to be told at funerals. With that sword, he had developed a single signature cut, the Tsubame Gaishi, the returning swallow. A downward strike followed instantly by a reversed upward cut, fast enough that the eye could not separate the two motions. It was named after the way a swallow turns in the air without losing speed. The Hosokawa records say he had demonstrated it once by cutting a swallow in mid-flight in the castle garden at Kokura. He was handsome. He moved well. He had the patronage of Hosokawa Tadaoki, lord of the Kokura domain on the northern tip of Kyushu, a daimyo of the new order whose wife Gracia had been the woman who died in Osaka. Hosokawa had inherited his domain in 1600 after Sekigahara, when his loyalty to Ieyasu had paid out at 400,000 koku. He was a tea master, a student of Sen no Rikyu. He was also a man who had hunted down and beheaded the retainer who had failed to follow his wife in death. He was not a man to be played with. He had given Kojiro a stipend, a position as official sword instructor of the domain, and a household of students. In every way that mattered to the political order, Kojiro was the official sword of Japan. Musashi was the unofficial one. The duel had to happen. The arrangement ran through Hosokawa's senior retainers. The official who carried the negotiations was Nagaoka Sado, one of Hosokawa's chief vassals, a man Musashi knew personally from earlier years in Kyoto. Nagaoka Sado was a tea ceremony student of his lord and a connoisseur of paintings. He had met Musashi through mutual acquaintances in the art world. The negotiations took weeks. Each side submitted formal letters. The conditions were spelled out. Weapons of choice, witnesses, the handling of the corpse, if there was one. The location was selected to be neutral and isolated, a small island in the Kanman Strait, the narrow band of water between Honshu and Kyushu. The official name was Funashima. After the duel, locals began to call it by a different name, the name they still use today, Ganryujima, the island of Ganryu, Kojiro's school name. The strait itself was a working channel. Cargo boats moved through it daily between Shimonoseki on the Honshu side and Moji on the Kyushu side. Heiki crabs lived in the sand of the bottom. The local fishermen still told the story of the Battle of Dan-no-ura, fought in these same waters in AD 1185, when the child emperor Antoku had been carried into the sea by his grandmother to escape the Minamoto fleet. The crabs in the strait carried, on their shells, faces. The locals said they were the faces of the drowned Heike samurai. The current ran fast through the narrow stretch and reversed with the tide. The island was a low spit of rock and sand, no permanent residence, exposed to the wind off the inland sea. There was one usable landing beach on the eastern side. At low tide, the beach widened. At high tide, it shrank to a strip of wet sand the width of a man's outstretched arms. The date was set, the 13th day of the 4th month of the 17th year of the Keicho era. April 13th, AD 1612. The appointed time was the hour of the dragon. 8 o'clock in the morning. Low tide was calculated to fall close to that hour, exposing the maximum sand. Kojiro crossed first. He was ferried over from the Kokura side in a clan boat with full attendants. He stepped onto the beach in clean, formal clothes, a hori marked with the Hosokawa crest of 9 planets. His hair was tied in the long ponytail he was known for. The drying pole hung at his left hip in a long lacquered scabbard with brass fittings. The official witnesses for Hosokawa took their positions along the higher ground. Nagaoka Sado watched from a vantage point above the beach. A clerk stood with a brush ready to record the event. A small stand of pine grew at the highest point of the island. The wind moved the needles. 8 o'clock came. The tide moved. The sun climbed. Musashi did not arrive. The strait between the island and the Honshu shore was empty. A single cargo boat with a square sail moved through the channel and gave the island a wide berth. An hour passed. Then 2. The same pattern from Rendaiji 8 years earlier, only the stakes had multiplied 100-fold. Then it had been a humiliated dojo master. Now it was a daimyo's chief retainer, official witnesses of the Kokura domain, the household name of Hosokawa, all standing on a sandbar in the wind while the named challenger did not come. A second boat was sent back across the strait to find him. Kojiro walked the beach. His sandals left a single line of prints along the wet edge of the surf, and then a second line, and a third. He drew the drying pole and ran a slow cut through empty air. He sheathed it. He drew it again. His breathing pattern changed. Witnesses later reported that the muscles in his face had set into a fixed expression by the third hour. One of the junior retainers offered him water. He waved it off. The fight had already started. He was losing it, without knowing it. Musashi was on the Honshu side, sitting in a fisherman's hut at Mukojima, eating a bowl of rice with pickled radish. The fisherman, in the local Kokura records, was named Sasaki Magoshiro. No relation to Kojiro. The same surname is common in the region. The Numata Kaki, written by a retainer of the Numata branch of the Hosokawa, records that Musashi had also slept past the agreed hour by his own design. He had drunk warm sake the night before and made a point of not setting any signal to wake him. When the second messenger arrived from the island, Musashi finished the rice. He rinsed the bowl. He picked up an oar from the side of the fisherman's boat. He took out his short sword, the wakizashi, and began to carve. The oar was a length of oak, longer than the drying pole by a measurable amount. He worked the grip down to fit his hands. He shaped a slight curve into the striking edge. He did not polish it. He did not bother to sand the splinters down. The finished weapon was an oversized wooden club, longer than any practical sword, ugly, raw, the wood still pale where he had cut into it. He stepped into the boat. The fishermen pushed off. The current ran against them. Musashi sat in the bow and watched the island. He had timed the crossing against the angle of the sun. The water at the bow made a small flat sound on each pull of the oar that remained in the fisherman's hand. The crossing took longer than usual. The fisherman, in the Numata Kaki account, was sweating from fear. Musashi told him to row evenly and not to look at the island. On the beach, Kojiro saw the boat coming. He saw the shape of the man in the bow. He saw what the man was holding. The drying pole came out of the scabbard. Kojiro, in the same motion, drew the saya off the blade, turned, and threw the scabbard into the surf. The lacquered wood hit the water and started to drift on the outgoing tide. Nagaoka Sado, on the high ground, noted the gesture and said nothing. A scabbard is the part of the weapon you need after the fight. To throw it away is to declare that you will not survive the next minute, or that your opponent will not. The boat ground into the sand. Musashi did not get out cleanly. He stepped down into the shallow water and walked the last few meters with his hakama soaking up to the knees. He carried the oar at his side. His hair was tied with a piece of cloth, twisted into a band across his forehead. His eyes were on Kojiro. When he was close enough to be heard, he spoke. The line is preserved in several of the surviving accounts, in slightly different forms. The version recorded by the Numata Kaki runs close to this. You have already lost. Why would you throw away the scabbard you will need again? Kojiro broke. He came forward into the surf with the drying pole already in motion. The Tsubame Gaeshi opened from above, a cut aimed at the crown of Musashi's head. The cut he had built his entire reputation around. The cut no man had ever escaped. The angle was perfect. The speed was perfect. Musashi had positioned himself, during those last steps through the shallows, with the rising sun directly behind his shoulder. The glare came over the water at the exact moment the blade started down. The light hit Kojiro's eyes at the top of the cut. The blade came down. It found cloth. It cut the headband from Musashi's forehead. The cloth fell into the wet sand. The skin underneath did not open. In the same fraction of a second, Musashi's oar was already moving up. The wood came over his shoulder in a two-handed arc. It hit Kojiro above the left eye, at the temple, on the thin bone where the skull is weakest. The Numata Kaki records the sound. It compares it to the sound of a melon dropped from a roof. Kojiro went down into the wet sand. The drying pole fell out of his hand. He was not yet dead. According to the Numata Kaki, as he lay on his back, he made one final attempt. He drew his short sword, the kodachi at his hip, and tried to cut upward at Musashi's legs. The cut opened the hakama at the knee. It did not reach the flesh. Musashi struck a second time with the oar across the ribs, then a third across the side of the head. The third blow was the one that ended Kojiro's breathing. Sasaki Kojiro stopped moving. The official witnesses had not moved either. The clerk did not raise his brush. Nagaoka Sado, on the high ground, said nothing. Musashi bowed once toward the witnesses, picked up his oar, and walked back to the boat. The fisherman, still in the boat, was crying. Musashi stepped in and told him to row. The current took them. By the time the tide reached the body on the beach, the boat was already most of the way back to the Honshu shore. The Hosokawa retainers came down off the high ground and stood around Kojiro. The retainers, Tatsuoka Matemon and Mochizuki Yajimon, are named in the records as the men who covered the body. They wrapped him in a cloth and carried him to a boat. He was buried near the strait. A small stone marker stood there for several centuries. Musashi never fought another formal duel after that morning. He was 29 years old. The decision was deliberate. There was no one left at the level required to test the philosophy. The Yoshioka were gone. The Hozoin spearmen had been beaten. The chain weapon masters had been beaten. The most celebrated sword in the country was lying in the sand on Funashima. The work was complete. He continued to fight, but at a different scale. In the winter of 1614 and the summer of 1615, he was present at the two sieges of Osaka Castle, when Tokugawa Ieyasu finally destroyed the Toyotomi line. The winter siege ended in a negotiated peace. Ieyasu used the peace to fill in the outer moats of the castle. The summer siege ended with the castle in flames. Hideyori killed himself inside the burning donjon on June 4, 1615. His mother Yododono followed him. His 7-year-old son, Kunimatsu, was caught fleeing on the road, taken to Kyoto, and beheaded at the Rokujo execution grounds. The new order locked itself in place over the corpses. Musashi was somewhere in the fighting. The Nitenki, a biography compiled by his students decades later, claims he served on the Tokugawa side under the Mizuno clan. Other accounts place him among the Toyotomi defenders. The records are unclear. He did not seek a stipend afterward. He went back to the road. He adopted 2 sons. The first was named Mikinosuke. He took service with Lord Honda Tadatoki at Himeji. When Tadatoki died of illness in 1626 at the age of 30, Mikinosuke followed his lord into death by ritual suicide. The second adopted son, Iori, took service with the Ogasawara clan at Akashi and later at Kokura. He served well. He commanded troops at the suppression of the Shimabara Christian rebellion in 1638, where over 30,000 peasants and ronin were killed inside Hara Castle. Musashi himself was present at Shimabara. He was struck by a stone thrown from the castle wall, and his leg was injured. It was the closest he came in his adult life to being killed by another man's weapon. The killing blow had come from a stone thrown by a starving peasant. He served briefly as a military advisor in Akashi and in Himeji. He laid out a garden at the Honmyoji temple. He painted. His ink paintings survive. A shrike on a bare branch, currently held in a private collection in Wakayama. A wild goose descending. A bodhisattva. A double portrait of two cormorants. The brushwork is economical, almost violent in its restraint. He used the same hands that had killed Kojiro to lay single lines of black ink on white paper and stop. The paintings carry the same signature as the swordwork. No wasted motion. The cut where it needs to be. In 1640, Lord Hosokawa Tadatoshi, son of the same Hosokawa who had patronized Kojiro, invited Musashi to Kumamoto, in Higo province on Kyushu. The Hosokawa had been transferred from Kokura to Kumamoto in 1632 when the previous lord of Higo, Kato Tadahiro, was stripped of his domain by the shogunate. The invitation came with a stipend of 300 koku and a residence. The son of Kojiro's patron took in the man who had killed Kojiro. The new order had finished settling. The old grudges were now collectible artifacts. Tadatoshi died the following year, in March of 1641, of an illness that took him in less than a week. Musashi grieved for him. He composed a written eulogy. Then, with his own body beginning to fail him, he climbed up onto Mount Iwato, outside Kumamoto, and walked into a cave called Reigando, the Spirit Rock Cave. It is still there. It is open to the wind. The floor is uneven stone. A small carved figure of Kannon sits at the back of the cave on a natural shelf in the rock. He sat down in that cave and began to write. He worked on the manuscript through 1643 and into the spring of 1645. He wrote in 5 sections. He titled them after the elements of Buddhist cosmology: earth, water, fire, wind, void. The collection was called Gorin no Sho, the Book of 5 Rings. Later readers tried to make the book into a work of Zen. It is not. It is a manual. The scroll of earth lays the foundation. Musashi opens by stating that the way of the warrior is the resolute acceptance of death. He does not mean this in a poetic sense. He means it as a technical requirement. A man who is unwilling to die cannot move correctly. The acceptance of death is the precondition for lethal speed. The scroll of water covers the body. The grip on the sword. The placement of the feet. The 5 basic stances. The shape of the eyes. The angle of the spine. He tells the reader how to walk. He tells the reader how to look at an enemy without focusing on any single point. He compares the trained mind to water because water takes the shape of the container and breaks the container when it freezes. The scroll of fire is strategy. Here he writes plainly about the tactics he used on the road. Take the rhythm of the opponent and break it. Move first when the opponent expects to move first. Move second when the opponent expects you to move first. Use the sun. Use the wind. Use the slope. Use the shadow. He describes the technique he calls becoming the enemy, in which the swordsman puts his mind into the body of the man across from him and reads the next attack from inside the opponent's intention. He describes a technique he calls crushing the head. He describes a technique called passing through. He describes a technique called sticking. None of these are metaphors. Each describes a specific way of putting the body of an opponent on the ground. The scroll of wind is the dissection of other schools. He goes through them by name and by habit. The schools that worship long swords. The schools that worship short swords. The schools that build rigid kata. The schools that build elaborate footwork. He names the Ito Ryu. He names the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, the official school of the Tokugawa shoguns themselves. He describes the failure inside each one. The wind scroll reads like a report compiled by someone who has tested every weapon and every form against living opponents, and recorded the breaking point of each. The scroll of void closes the book. It is shorter than the others. Readers have tried to find Buddhism in it for 400 years. Musashi describes the void as the state in which the trained body acts without intervening thought. It is the moment in the surf at Fukushima, when the oar came up before the conscious mind decided to lift it. It is the empty space at the top of the cut, when the swordsman is no longer choosing what to do. It is not peace. It is the absence of hesitation. He finished the manuscript on the 12th day of the 5th month of 1645. He handed the scrolls to one of his senior students, a man named Terao Magonojo. To Terao's younger brother, Kumanosuke, he handed a second document, a shorter one, 21 lines. He called it the Dokodo, the way of walking alone. It opens with the line, "Accept everything just the way it is." It ends with the line, "Never depart from the way." 7 days later, in his lodging in Kumamoto, he sat down with his sword across his knees. The records say his body was sitting upright when his students found him on the morning of the 19th day of the 5th month. He was 61 years old. He was buried on the road outside Kumamoto. Beside the road his old lord Hosokawa Tadatoshi would have traveled to inspect the eastern boundary of the domain. The grave is on the route. The story is that he asked to be buried in his armor, so that even in death he would salute his lord on the way past. He left behind a manuscript that has never gone out of print, a school that still teaches his two-sword style today, a small body of paintings held in Japanese museums and a few private collections, a long sword called the Hyogo Suke that survives in fragmentary records, and a question. The question is the one the book itself does not answer: whether a man can spend his entire life perfecting the practice of killing other men, and then sit down at the end and write down the method and call it a path of any kind, and have it remembered as wisdom. Musashi answered that question with his own life. The answer was yes. The Sword Saint title came later. It was added by people who needed the story to mean something larger than itself. The man in the cave did not call himself a saint. The man on the beach at Fukushima did not call himself a saint. The boy with the wooden staff in the village field at 13 did not call himself anything at all. He simply walked away from the bodies every time and went on to the next one. Thank you for going all the way to the end with us. If this kind of investigation is what you are here for, leave a comment with the figure you want us to autopsy next, drop a like to feed the algorithm, and share this with the one person in your life who already understands that history is mostly written in blood. You have just watched another premium documentary by Ancestral, your ultimate history hub on YouTube. The next investigation is already loading on your screen. Click it now. Walk with us into the next dark room.